In recent years, the literary landscape has experienced this massive cultural resurgence. Reading is no longer this quiet, isolated hobby that's contained off screen. It has been thoroughly gamified by social media algorithm. Communities on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram have turned reading into highly profitable form of content creation. If you're an aspiring author who has spent years studying the craft of writing, maybe you have written a few manuscripts or are planning to launch your own first work, and then navigating the online writing community can be a little disheartening. Like you open your feed only to see this massive influencer or some TV star or like a traditional celebrity, anyone who's like very famous, suddenly launching their debut fiction novel to like a wave of immediate praise and millions of guaranteed views. Then you look into their background and you realize this is their first time, anything relating to creative writing. And like they have absolutely nothing to do with literature, writing fiction. Before that, like this is the first time they are trying their hand at something like this. So yet, despite all of this, they are occupying like prime real estate on bestseller lists. Naturally, you're going to look at yourself at your own desk and, you see this dedicated writing pulling late nights, pouring blood and tears and sweat into this complex project. The only structural difference between your writing, your story, and their story has nothing to do with quality at all. It is just the sheer velocity of the pre existing social media fan base that they will have, social media reach that they will have, and the capital that is going to allow them to launch a book with minimum sort of tension, minimum trouble, minimum problem. As an author myself, I spent time thinking about it and ended up writing a article on Substack on why everyone should not and cannot be a writer, particularly a fiction writer. This video sort of expands on that. Instead of looking at why the thing that I talked about in the article, I'm going to look at why everyone is writing fiction. Why is it that every single person nowadays is scrambling to write a novel, and how the commodification of authorship is actually damaging literature, and why we as a creative community of writers should do something about it and, take a look at it. Let's head to the courtyard today. Before we dive into the structural mechanics that we're going to discuss today, I highly suggest checking out that Substack article that I've written. The link is in the description. Now, even if you do not have the time, I'll still put out the core point here. The main argument, or the main point actually, because it was an opinion article, the main point I was trying to make in that article is that fiction writing is a profound and a demanding form of art, no different from, let's say, classical dance, opera, or sculpting, or fine painting, any of these. It's like no different from that. In any of those disciplines, we universally acknowledge and respect that not everyone possesses the raw inclination, the structural training, or the technical mastery to pursue such things professionally. Yet, for some reason, society refuses to afford fiction writing the same artistic gravity. Like, we do not look at fiction writing and say, okay, it's a very serious form of art and not everyone can pull it off. I think the root of this sort of understanding, the root of this democratic fallacy, has comes from this massive cognitive error. Like a lot of people mistakenly, equate raw imagination with the actual craft of fiction. And to be fair, there is a historical reason for that. Like, there is a reason to why a lot of people think that fiction and imagination are one and the same thing. If you look at the etymology of like the word fiction, it traces itself back to the 15th century Old French word fiction. I think that's how it's pronounced, which means dissimulation or ruse or invention or just fabrication, something that you create. Then you go back even further and you see that this word derives itself from the Latin fictionem, which means like a fashioning or a feigning, because the word has historically sort of been tied to the act of mental fabrication. All all of it leads to, like, it's no wonder that a lot of people think that imagination and fiction are like synonyms, interchangeable synonyms, and they mean the one and the same thing. But there is a catch. Like, there is something that you as a storyteller realize very soon when you get into writing. And that is, while all fiction is technically imagination, not all imagination turns or needs to be turned into fiction or can be turned into fiction. Just consider your own creative mind for a moment. Think of all the bizarre, surreal ideas you might have had while perhaps daydreaming or just thinking about your favorite show, your favorite book, or just any time, any moment when you were alone with your mind, any thought you might have had. Have you really turned literally all of those ideas into like a compelling story? No, because it's not possible. In fact, as a writer, a massive part of your job is to lock certain ideas away because you realize that these ideas possess absolutely no narrative potential. That is the exact threshold that certain non writers fail to comprehend. Fiction is just not merely recording what comes to your mind as imagination, the daydreams you have on paper. It is a highly specialized mechanical process where you are taking a chaotic spark of imagination that comes to your mind and then building an intentional structural reality around it, anchoring it so perfectly into like a parallel real world, a real world parallel, that the story starts to feel devastatingly real, even if the reader knows that this all is fabricated. Like, they can tell that the story is fabricated, but they still believe that it feels so real. That's what you do when you take imagination into fiction. Now, of course, we cannot pinpoint like this entire trend of like everyone writing onto just this misinterpretation of the word fiction. That is like the tip of the much larger cynical iceberg of this entire thing. Frankly, I think it's this exact same superficial mindset that drives people to think that reading fiction is not real reading, which I think is a very reductive, elitist uh, point of view that I absolutely detest. If we move further down this iceberg, actually past the surface level, past this misunderstanding of the word, we need we look at these we look at the structural reasons why non-writers assume that fiction writing is like this low effort thing, like it's easy to write fiction. And that has to do with the fact that even if people look beyond the idea of fiction being just raw imagination and correctly equate it to storytelling, they fall into another trap here, a trap where they assume that because humans are hardwired for narrative for like centuries, then storytelling itself must be really easy. But the truth is, storytelling is not an easy task. If you look back into history, did like every single courtier in a king's palace, in a king's court, in the royal palace, have the capacity to weave a narrative? Absolutely not. Historically, storytelling was highly specialized task that was reserved exclusively for those who could actually tell a story, who had the ability to hook the audience into the narrative, keep them hooked for like a long while, sustain the narrative tension, and leave the audience in absolute awe. Consider the tradition of bards. While they were traditionally poets, bards are poets, they were they were first and foremost masters of narrative translation, using impassioned, lyrical, and epic verses to often tell stories to preserve entire cultures. Originally within Celtic traditions, these individuals were elite composers of eulogy and, complex satire. They held an immense distinct position in Irish and Welsh traditions and societies because their work require like highly technical, refined technical skill set. They weren't just reciting a set of poems or just reciting a set of lines, sequence of events. No, within those sequence of events, there was subtext. There was subtle messaging, satire. Everyone in those societies listened to those stories, but not everyone was out there trying to be a bard. They respected the boundary between the consumer and the craftsman. Now, this historical precedent makes a critical truth clear. While fiction writing is fundamentally rooted in storytelling, it's deeply connected to storytelling. Storytelling itself is a very elite intellectual discipline. Like, great narratives are not just constructed just for the sake of filling pages. You don't just tell a story, you tell a story that is engineered with intent. There's intent behind what you are trying to tell. Think of all the stories you might have been told through childhood. Remember, often all of them had a theme, a message, a warning. They never were just stories. They had a precise message, a complex philosophical theme to them, or even sharp cultural satire. If you see a lot of sort of analysis of literature involves looking back at really old stories that might have been just stories in their time, but when you like read into them, you realize there is more to just that story. And doing that, just, telling a story with a lot packed within it, that requires mechanical precision and artistic instinct that not everyone can pull off. But we have to look past this psychological misunderstanding, okay? Just because an average person, thinks fiction is imagination or misunderstands that storytelling is easy, doesn't mean they're going to lock themselves in their room to start writing a 500 or 300 page fantasy novel. Not really. They will need a structural catalyst. They will need a strong force, a very compelling reason to do so. And that catalyst, that compelling reason, is this really massive, unprecedented shift in consumer behavior. Everyone is reading fiction. In recent years, the literary landscape has experienced this massive cultural resurgence. Reading is no longer this quiet, isolated hobby that's contained off screen. It has been thoroughly gamified by social media algorithm. Communities on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram have turned reading into highly profitable form of content creation. Creators read, they manufacture aesthetic multimedia content around their reading habits, and then they drive their massive following to read those titles, and the cycle continues. Now look at this through the lens of a media strategist. As millions of users turn to reading, particularly to escape the toxic paralysis of doom scrolling, to avoid just constantly being on social media, digital creators realize that their target audience is migrating into a new market, the market of reading, the market of books. To prevent losing the attention of their audience, the creator is also forced to turn to that particular market. The classic creator consumer dynamic of social media then gets copy pasted onto the publishing industry, where the influencer becomes the writer and the follower becomes the reader. This is not some artistic awakening, this is cold corporate strategy. The influencer looks at all these popular, already trending books on social media that their audience is consuming, then takes the popular books formula, copies their tropes with minor variations, and pushes like it for a mass produced debut novel straight into production for their audience to read. They invest little to absolute no labor into the actual craft of storytelling or the architectural development of character arc. Their goal is not to contribute to the literary canon or become one of the most famous writers the world has ever seen. It is to extract profit from a market their audience has already entered. They are simply chasing user metrics, creating a commodified product to monetize their followers' new interest. To understand this, let's take an example. Let's say we have imagine this mainstream food creator, a recipe creator, who notices that their core audience has suddenly become deeply health conscious, rapidly pivoting to organic and clean eating. To maintain their grip on that particular demographic, the creator immediately launches like a health food brand. They might possess like zero technical knowledge on nutritional science, metabolic health, or food manufacturing, and like all they know is like good food recipes. But they will still aggressively launch the product because it's the only way to keep their audience tied to their personal brand. That is exactly what is happening to literature. Influencers aren't writing fiction because they have some urgent burning story to tell or like a world changing story to be told. They're writing fiction because a book has become the ultimate piece of branded merchandise, a hollow corporate vessel to ensure that their followers never stop looking at them. What we are witnessing is not isolated to like the publishing industry or to the writing community. It's part of a much larger systemic cultural shift. Social media has begun to operate like parasite, executing an algorithmic colonization of thoughts over every single artistic discipline. Digital creators suddenly look at their audience and look at what they are consuming and spot a metric trend, and boom, they launch a commodified product into that space purely to extract profit for the sake of market extraction. But it forces us to ask a very critical, honest question. If, let's say, you as a content creator, your voice fits the medium of short form content creation best, why must you colonize other spaces just to expand a profit margin? Can we please leave specialized crafts to the individuals who are actually trained in it, who are actually talented in it, who have mastered, who have taken all their lives to mastering that craft? Now, let me make this one distinction, one like important qualification here. And that is, I'm not saying that all digital content creators are incapable of becoming fiction writers. I am definitely sure that digital content creators can be writers. There are some writers who are digital content creators like me. Human potential is expansive. Okay. My argument here is that if a creator has absolutely zero organic interest in like literary arts or has never put the labor into learning the mechanics of the craft of storytelling, then they should honor the boundaries of their own genius and stick to what they do best. I genuinely want you to engage with the Substack article that I've written regarding this because in that I state and I reinstated here that writing is not for everyone, okay? In that, I'm defending the immense, exhausting labor that writing requires as a legitimate form of art. You do not need to force yourself to write a novel to be a storyteller. Human beings have the ability to tell a story through like a vast amount of ways, vast amount of different, unique ways. Some people tell their stories through music. Some do it through like classical dance like Bharatnatyam, or others capture it through, the single static stroke of a paintbrush. You do not need to mimic an industry formula to justify your creative voice. You simply need to find the specific canvas that naturally fits your soul. And that canvas can absolutely be anything at all. And that wraps up the video today. And with that, we close the doors to the courtyard. I will see you the next time. If you loved this video, please think of subscribing, commenting about your point of view on this influencer writing trend. And also do join my Substack community if you're a writer, because there I share my stories, the novel that I'm currently writing. Also, I share writing tips based off of my experience with Chinese dramas and all of that. So do join that if you are interested in writing in general. It's called Nights of Pendum. I'll see you in the next one. Keep theorizing till then.